In 2011, a young traveler named Adrian Kessler vanished while hiking in Vermont, and for 4 long years his family searched desperately for answers, until a construction crew at the ruins of the abandoned Brookside Inn made a discovery that shocked everyone when they found his body wedged deep inside a soot-filled chimney in a position that defied explanation and raised far more questions than it answered. Was it a tragic accident or something far more sinister? What really happened inside that chimney? And why did Adrian never make it out alive? In the summer of 2011, the quiet town of Middlebury, Vermont, became the stage for a mystery that would haunt the region for years to come. 32-year-old Adrian Kessler, a visitor from Boston with an eye for photography and a fascination with forgotten places, arrived in the Green Mountains for what was supposed to be a brief, restorative hiking trip. Adrian wasn't reckless. Friends and family described him as adventurous but meticulous, someone who prepared for every excursion and carried his camera everywhere to capture landscapes most people ignored. He was particularly drawn to ruins, places where history clung to rotting wood and stone, and Vermont's forests promised plenty of them. On June 12th, Adrian checked into a modest roadside motel just off Route 125, where he left his silver sedan neatly parked and chatted briefly with the front desk clerk. That afternoon, he stopped at a small diner for coffee, asking the waitress if there were any old sites worth exploring. She recalled later that his interest sharpened when she mentioned the Brookside Inn, a sprawling 19th-century lodge that had burned partially in the 1970s and had been left to rot ever since. Hidden beneath decades of overgrowth, the inn had become a local curiosity, the kind of place teens dared each other to sneak into but adults warned outsiders to avoid. The waitress said Adrian's face lit up when she told him, as if the ruin itself had called to him. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, he was last seen leaving the motel with a backpack and his camera bag slung across his shoulder. He told the clerk he wanted to check out the trails before dark. He never returned. The following morning, his motel bed remained untouched, his belongings still neatly packed, his phone charger still plugged into the wall. His car sat motionless in the lot. By June 14th, Adrian's family, alarmed by his silence, reported him missing, and a search began. Vermont State Police, fire departments, K-9 units, and dozens of volunteers swept the dense woods surrounding the Brookside trails. Helicopters circled ridgelines while divers searched nearby creeks and ponds, but the forest gave nothing back. No footprints, no torn fabric, not even the faint signal of Adrian's phone. Searchers described it as though he had stepped off the path and dissolved into the trees. Days passed, then weeks, and the official effort slowly dwindled. State resources shifted elsewhere, volunteers returned to their lives, and media coverage waned. Yet the case had already taken on a sinister weight. Locals whispered about the Brookside Inn, trading stories of strange lights in the windows, of voices heard in the ruins at night, of past disappearances linked to its grounds. For Adrian's family, especially his younger sister Mara, none of the official explanations rang true. He was too careful, too experienced, and too close to his loved ones to vanish by choice. And so the story of Adrian Kessler joined the growing list of unsolved vanishings across New England, but unlike the others, his bore the chilling nickname that would linger for years: the tourist who walked into the forest and never came back. In the years that followed Adrian Kessler's disappearance, the silence around his case grew heavier, like an unfinished sentence that no one dared complete. At first, the search carried momentum. His family, especially his younger sister Mara, refused to let his name slip from the headlines. Mara created a dedicated Facebook page, posting updates, memories, and pleas for information. Dozens of locals joined search parties, combing new sections of the forest each season, clinging to hope that some overlooked clue would surface. Adrian's parents made repeated trips from Boston, meeting with investigators, attending press conferences, and even hiring private detectives when the official investigation slowed. But every path ended the same way, empty-handed. Over time, small fragments of information trickled in, each one raising more questions than answers. Phone records revealed that Adrian's cell phone had pinged a tower near the Brookside Inn the evening he vanished, hours after he was last seen walking out of the motel. Searchers had scoured the grounds of the abandoned inn during the initial sweep, but its crumbling walls and collapsed floors made thorough inspection dangerous. In 2012, a hiker came forward claiming he seen a man resembling Adrian moving through the woods near Middlebury, but when police followed up, the lead evaporated. As the months dragged into years, theories filled the void. Some insisted Adrian had simply chosen to walk away from his old life, starting over, somewhere far from Boston and the weight of expectations. Others suggested a tragic accident, his body hidden by the vast wilderness that had claimed countless hikers before him. Yet darker suspicion spread as well, that he had stumbled across something at the Brookside Inn he wasn't meant to see, and that someone had ensured he never left. Online forums picked up his story, with amateur sleuths dissecting everything from his last known photograph to urban legends surrounding the inn. They noted a peculiar thread. In one of Adrian's final pictures uploaded to his private blog, a shot of the forest canopy near Brookside, a faint shadow in the corner looked almost like a figure watching from behind a tree. Most dismissed it as a trick of the light, but others swore it was deliberate, that Adrian hadn't been alone in those woods. The family's grief hardened into a dull persistence. Mara, in particular, refused to stop, sending emails to journalists, pleading with police chiefs, and organizing vigils in Adrian's name each June. Still, every summer passed with no discovery, no closure. By the fourth year, the official narrative was bleak. Adrian Kessler, age 32, had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the Green Mountains, another name on the list of missing persons New England quietly carried. But underneath that silence, a rumor persisted in Middlebury, whispered among locals who avoided the trail near Brookside Inn, that the forest hadn't simply hidden Adrian, but had trapped him somewhere dark, waiting to be found. 4 years after Adrian Kessler's disappearance, Middlebury was a town that had largely folded his case into the quiet archives of unsolved tragedies, until one sweltering afternoon in August 2015, when a construction crew stumbled upon something inside the ruins of the Brookside Inn. The property, long left to rot, had recently been purchased by a developer with plans to clear the structure and reclaim the land. The inn, a skeletal husk of scorched timber and stone, had been a landmark for ghost hunters and thrill seekers, but to the crew it was nothing more than a hazard waiting to collapse. As they began dismantling the rear section of the building, one worker noticed a foul, unnatural odor seeping from the old chimney stack that rose above the crumbling roofline. At first he assumed it was the carcass of an animal. Raccoons, bats, even deer had been known to crawl into the ruins' hollows. But when they shined a flashlight into the soot-lined shaft, what stared back was not animal bone. Wedged deep within the flue, entangled in layers of ash and charred brick, was the unmistakable shape of a human skeleton. Work halted instantly, the site cordoned off as police and forensic teams arrived. News spread like wildfire. The ruin that had been central to Adrian's disappearance was now a crime scene. Within days, dental records confirmed the identity. The remains belonged to Adrian Kessler, the tourist who had vanished in 2011. The discovery shocked investigators, not only because of where he was found, but how. Adrian's body had been lodged vertically in the chimney, knees bent awkwardly, arms pinned to his sides, as if he had been forced or funneled down. His clothing was shredded, blackened by soot, but still intact enough to identify the same hiking gear he had worn the day he disappeared. Forensic teams noted strange details: the absence of his backpack and camera, both of which had never been recovered, the odd fact that his shoes were missing, and the position of his body, which suggested he had been alive when he entered the chimney but unable to escape. Theories ignited. Some investigators cautiously labeled it a tragic accident, suggesting Adrian had attempted to climb down the chimney, perhaps seeking shelter or exploration gone wrong, and became trapped. But skeptics, including his family, found this explanation impossible to swallow. The chimney was narrow, lined with jagged stone, and sealed at the bottom by an old hearth blocked with heavy debris. Why would Adrian, an experienced outdoorsman, choose such a bizarre and dangerous entry point? Others floated darker possibilities, that someone had forced him inside, that he had been pursued and hidden away in the most macabre of graves. Reporters swarmed Middlebury, digging up folklore about the Brookside Inn, whispers of rituals once performed there, of trespassers who vanished without explanation, of eerie lights seen flickering in its windows at night. Mara Kessler, now hardened by years of grief, stood before cameras and declared, "My brother did not crawl into that chimney by choice. Someone put him there." The discovery that was supposed to bring closure only deepened the mystery, transforming Adrian's case from a tragic disappearance into one of Vermont's most haunting unsolved crimes. The discovery of Adrian Kessler's body inside the chimney of the Brookside Inn sent shockwaves not only through Middlebury, but across Vermont and beyond, reigniting a case many had assumed would remain cold forever. Within hours of the confirmation, the ruins were surrounded by yellow tape and floodlights, and investigators combed every inch of the decayed inn, hoping the chimney would yield more answers than questions. What they found, however, only deepened the riddle. The chimney itself was unnaturally narrow, barely wide enough for a grown man to squeeze into, and forensic experts noted that Adrian's shoulders would have been almost too broad to slip through unaided. His position, wedged feet first and upright, indicated he had entered from above, yet the opening at the top of the stack was obscured by heavy metal grating, rusted but still largely intact. For him to have gone down voluntarily, someone would have had to remove the grate, yet no tool marks were found, and the corroded screws appeared untouched for decades. At the base of the chimney, where one might expect to find an open fireplace, the passage was blocked by layers of cement and debris, meaning there was no exit for Adrian to crawl toward. To investigators, it was as though he had been sealed into a tomb. Theories clashed in the days that followed. Some detectives leaned toward accident, proposing that Adrian, driven by curiosity, had attempted to climb into the structure for shelter or exploration, only to become trapped. But this explanation infuriated Mara, who reminded reporters and police alike that her brother was cautious and prepared, not reckless, and that his missing possessions, especially his expensive camera, pointed more toward foul play than misadventure. Autopsy results were inconclusive. Adrian's body was too badly decomposed to determine an exact cause of death, but tests suggested he may have died from dehydration or suffocation rather than trauma. There were no obvious broken bones, but traces of soot in the rib cage hinted that he had been alive, at least briefly, after becoming trapped. The notion that he may have spent his last hours or days struggling inside the chimney horrified the public and enraged his family. The Vermont State Police reopened the case fully, interviewing locals who had lived near the Brookside Inn in 2011. Some residents recalled seeing unusual lights inside the ruins late at night in the months around Adrian's disappearance. A retired groundskeeper swore he had once heard chanting and found melted candles near the inn's altar-like dining hall, but no evidence substantiated his claims. Others quietly mentioned that Adrian wasn't the first person to vanish around Brookside, a drifter in the 1980s, a pair of teenagers in the early 1990s. But those stories had been relegated to campfire tales. Police, wary of fanning superstition, focused instead on tangible leads. Had Adrian been lured to the inn by someone who knew of his interest in abandoned sites? Had he stumbled across squatters, drug traffickers, or someone else using the property for darker purposes? Unfortunately, time had erased much of the evidence. Weather, vandalism, and decay had rendered the inn a shell of itself, and if anyone had forced Adrian into the chimney, There was little to prove it. Still, inconsistencies gnawed at investigators. Why were his shoes missing? Why was his backpack never recovered? Why, if he had entered the chimney willingly, had he not left any sign of struggle at the top where the grate should have blocked him? The mystery drew national attention, with documentaries, podcasts, and online forums dissecting every available detail. Amateur sleuths speculated about occult activity, pointing to the melted candle remnants and graffiti symbols found nearby. Others suggested a more human horror, that Adrian had been murdered and hidden in the chimney to ensure he would never be found. Mara became the face of the fight for answers, appearing in interviews where she insisted her brother had been the victim of foul play, repeating through tears that Adrian was careful, Adrian was loved, and Adrian was not alone that night. Though the case remained officially unsolved, the image of a man trapped within a chimney, discovered years after his screams had faded into silence, became an enduring nightmare for Middlebury. Parents warned their children away from the Brookside trails. Hikers reported unease near the inn's ruins, and the story spread as a cautionary tale that blurred the line between crime and legend. The Brookside Inn was eventually demolished in early 2016, its stones hauled away in an attempt to erase the horror it contained. Yet for those who remembered, its absence only made the mystery more haunting. The ground itself seemed to breathe with unanswered questions, and Adrian's death lingered as a puzzle with no edges, a case forever dangling between tragedy and something far more sinister. In the years following the demolition of the Brookside Inn, the story of Adrian Kessler refused to fade. Instead, it grew into one of the most unsettling unsolved mysteries Vermont had ever witnessed, a tale retold with hushed voices in bars, classrooms, and online forums, each retelling adding new shadows to the truth. For Mara Kessler, closure remained elusive. The discovery of her brother's body brought a kind of finality, but it was an answer with no explanation, a period that ended the sentence yet left the meaning undecipherable. She poured her grief into advocacy, becoming a speaker at missing persons conferences, reminding audiences that disappearance is not the end of a person's story, that behind every headline is a family condemned to years of uncertainty. But privately, Mara remained haunted by the chimney, by the questions that festered like wounds. Who removed the grate? Why were his shoes missing? And why was his camera, the object that had led him to Vermont in the first place, never recovered? Online sleuths took these questions and spun them into elaborate webs of theory. Some were grounded in reason, the idea that Adrian had been robbed, attacked, and hidden by someone passing through. Others were outlandish, invoking secret societies, ritual sacrifices, or paranormal forces tied to the ruins' long history. On Reddit threads and late-night podcasts, the Chimney Man became an enduring subject, his name invoked alongside other infamous unsolved disappearances. Yet behind the noise was a kernel of something that even seasoned investigators admitted they could not shake. The position of Adrian's body simply did not align with accident. A man of his size could not have slipped down voluntarily, and the absence of tools or signs of forced entry around the grate only magnified the sense that something deliberate, calculated, and cruel had taken place. Former detectives, speaking off record, confessed to journalists that in their careers they had rarely encountered a case so perplexing, where every potential explanation seemed to contradict itself. If Adrian had climbed in willingly, why had he not shouted for help, especially with hikers occasionally passing by? If he had been forced, how had his captor maneuvered him into the shaft without leaving traces? In the absence of evidence, the void was filled with whispers. For the residents of Middlebury, the Brookside Inn became a legend in itself, its absence more haunting than its decayed presence had ever been. Parents told their children the story of Adrian Kessler not as a cautionary tale about carelessness, but as a warning about the unseen dangers lurking in the most ordinary places. Hikers claimed that on misty mornings near the clearing where the inn once stood, they could hear faint echoes of scratching from beneath the soil, a superstition that spread enough that the area was avoided by locals long after the last stone was hauled away. Journalists occasionally revisited the case, their articles painting Adrian as both victim and cipher, a man whose final moments remained sealed behind soot and brick. Documentaries on streaming services repackaged the story with ominous music and reenactments, each ending with the same unanswered question. Did Adrian enter the chimney by choice, or was he put there by another hand? Mara, watching these portrayals, often admitted they felt exploitative, but she also acknowledged the necessity of keeping Adrian's name alive, of refusing to let the silence that swallowed him take hold again. By 2018, the Kessler case had transcended true crime and entered folklore. College students told the tale at bonfires, inventing details that his body had been marked with symbols, that the chimney was sealed from both ends, that his final words had been etched into the brick. None of these were true, but each falsehood reflected a deeper truth, the human need to make sense of the senseless. Mara continued to visit Vermont once a year, standing at the overgrown lot where the inn once stood, a private vigil that locals came to recognize as part of the cycle of the town itself. In Boston, Adrian's old friends aged, had children, moved on, but his name was frozen in time, forever 32, forever curious, forever trapped in the vertical grave. Police eventually closed the file, labeling the death inconclusive, possible misadventure, a phrase Mara found insulting, a bureaucratic attempt to define the undefinable. To her, and to many who followed the story, Adrian's fate was neither accident nor simple tragedy. It was a question carved into the marrow of the town, a story whose lack of an ending was its ending. And so the legacy of the Brookside chimney endured. For some, it was a warning about the dangers of obsession and the fragility of safety in the wilderness. For others, it was a symbol of the limits of truth, the way certain answers remain locked away, hidden behind stone walls we cannot dismantle. For Mara, it was a reminder that grief is not only about absence, but about the labyrinth of not knowing, of waking each day with a brother both found and lost. Adrian Kessler's story lived on in whispers, in podcasts, in urban legends, but most of all in the hollow silence of questions never resolved. And perhaps that was the most chilling legacy of all, that sometimes the forest does not simply swallow, it hides, that sometimes the ruins we explore are not empty but waiting, and that sometimes the chimney does not vent smoke, but secrets, rising into the night, unanswered, forever.